After the race on Sunday, we'll be cutting down this field from 12 to the Elite 8. There's 2 guys already locked in, but there's still 6 other positions up for grabs, and there's certainly going to be a lot of competition for those spots this weekend. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. Fairly slow news week for NASCAR, but that's good. Gives me a chance to step back and talk a little bit more about the playoff picture, because we are going into an elimination race this Sunday at Kansas Speedway, and so there's some, interesting storylines to talk about there. Like I said at the very beginning, only 2 drivers are locked into the next round. There are still 6 spots technically up for grabs. There's, some pretty big names down around the cut line, right around the bubble there. There's a few drivers currently on the outside of the top 8 that we definitely have to talk about. So that's what I'm going to dedicate this episode to. Let's jump right into it, boys and girls. Right there you see that is the playoff grid as it stands now. That's the point standings. You'll notice it's slightly different than what I showed you after Talladega this last Sunday. That's because earlier this week, Kyle Larson and his 42 team was penalized 10 extra points. Apparently during the race at Talladega, when they were repairing crash damage, they used stuff they weren't supposed to be using. Apparently the rule says you're only allowed to repair the car. You got that 6-minute crash clock. You're only allowed to use like tape and like stuff like that. Instead, the 42 team apparently used some sort of metal tabs to attach things to the car. So that is against NASCAR's rules, so a 10-point penalty for them. That doesn't make that big of a difference. He was already, basically in a must-win scenario for Kansas. Just kind of confirms that even more. But we'll get into that more in a second. Let's go ahead and go down this list and talk about some of these guys. Obviously, at the top, you have Elliott and Almirola. They're locked in. Not a lot to say there. Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch have run well enough these last 2 weeks, and they have obviously tons of bonus points from their many wins during the regular season, so they're basically locked in. There's really not a lot to talk about there. If you ask me, the top 5 are basically 100% locked in. Even Joey Logano there in 5th, who's, only about 39 points to the good, you can see. I still think that's more than half of a full race worth of points, even with the stages, so I think he's all right. It's going to take a pretty catastrophic failure to knock any of those 3 guys out of the playoffs. And I mean catastrophic as in like they just forget to show up to the race on Sunday. You can see there between 8th and 9th, right there on the cut line, it's an 18-point gap. That's pretty big. But what's interesting is when you look at the names around it. You got Martin Truex Jr., the defending Cup Series champion, who's been one of the quote-unquote big 3 drivers for the first half of this year. He's right there on the cut line. And then you have Brad Keselowski, who came into the playoffs with more momentum than anyone, but he's had 2 bad finishes in a row. Now he's in a deep, deep hole. You got a couple SHR guys there just barely sneaking into the next round with Bowyer and Kurt Busch. They both have pretty big cushions. They're in good positions, but Bowyer has been a little inconsistent in these playoffs. Keep an eye on him this weekend. But here's where things get really interesting is when you look at some of these drivers outside of the top 8, 9th through 12th there, of those 4 guys currently outside the top 8, at least 3 of them, I think, have a real chance of winning at Kansas. And remember, if you win a race, that automatically locks you in, bumps you ahead of everybody. So Martin Truex Jr. currently is sitting there in 8th, but say Brad Keselowski wins the race, if Truex is still sitting there in 8th at the end of the race, he's going to be bumped down to 9th and will miss out. So I know there's a big points cushion there, but it's important to look at the names outside of the top 8. Kyle Larson's been really well known to run well at mile-and-a-half racetracks. He's been good at Kansas in the past. Brad Keselowski's been one of the best at mile-and-a-halfs this year. He's also outside the top 8. Ryan Blaney just won at the Roval a couple weeks ago and had a lot of momentum after that. He's had some issues since then, but he led a lot of laps at intermediate tracks at the beginning of the season, so you can't sleep on him either. What I'll be watching Sunday is primarily the battle between Bowyer, Kurt Busch, and Martin Truex Jr. to try and avoid being the 8th guy on the grid. And then I'll be watching guys like Keselowski, Blaney, and Kyle Larson to see if they can, obviously just win the race, because that could completely shake things up. When you first look at this grid and you see that 18-point deficit, which is pretty big, even in the stage racing era, you kind of think that maybe this weekend's race is going to be a little anticlimactic. Maybe it still will, but I'm very confident in guys like Larson and Blaney and Keselowski to potentially make some noise and, goodness, maybe spoil the party for one of these big names up ahead of them. The moment you have guys like Aric Almirola win to vault himself up to the top of the grid, or Chase Elliott or Joey Logano, big names, but not, like the most dominant drivers. Those are not drivers we expected to be completely locked in at this point. We thought they'd be around the bubble. You didn't expect, at least I didn't expect, Martin Truex Jr. to be down there in 8th. I didn't expect Keselowski to be outside the top 8. Those are big names. Needless to say, at the end of the race on Sunday, we will have 4 pretty popular drivers, pretty good drivers, pretty talented race teams on the outside of the top 8 and basically being sent home. I haven't talked about Alex Bowman yet, and I don't mean to show any disrespect to Alex Bowman, but he's really the one driver on this top 12 that is, he's basically out. I don't mean to pick on him here, but he's 68 points out. I didn't even know it was mathematically possible to be that far behind in this playoff format. The reason I'm not really talking about Alex Bowman in relation to these other guys, he's been fine this year. He's honestly overachieved given how that 88 car ran last year. But of all these 12 drivers still in the playoffs, Alex Bowman's the only guy there that really has never come close to winning a race this year. I mean, most all these guys ahead of him have won races this year, and then you still have guys like Larson who've been really close, led a lot of laps. And then you have Alex Bowman, who, no offense to him, but he has really never been in contention to win any races this year. And that's, just kind of, that's what sets him apart from the rest of this field here. The fact that he made it to the round of 12 is a success on this season for Alex Bowman. We don't really need to talk about him anymore. He's probably going to get eliminated. He's going to need to win the race, and I just do not see that happening. If he does win the race, goodness. Again, I don't mean to sound like I'm picking on Alex Bowman. We got to remember, Dale Earnhardt Jr. drove this car last year and was like 20th in points all year. So for him to make the round of 12 in a kind of a down year for Hendrick Motorsports is very impressive. So good season for Bowman, but he's not moving on past this round. Not a chance. And so now, before I end the show, what I'm known for is making my sometimes ill-advised predictions. I've been doing pretty good so far in these playoffs. I did pick Aric Almirola to win this last weekend at Talladega, and got that one right. And currently, if we look at the playoff grid and we compare it to what I predicted coming into this round, I've got 3 of the 4 being eliminated correct. So far, so good for me. And because of how accurate I've been this round so far, I'm going to stand by most of my predictions here. I think Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, and Alex Bowman will all be eliminated after this race at Kansas. I expect, at least Larson and Blaney to maybe run top 5 or top 10 and make some noise, but I don't think they're getting in. I had the 3 of them getting eliminated at the beginning of this round, and I'm sticking by it because they have not done anything to prove me wrong so far. Aric Almirola was the other driver coming into this round that I thought would be eliminated. He obviously won at Talladega. He's been on a hot streak lately, so I got that prediction wrong. So I have to pick someone to kind of take his place. And we got some big names around that cut line with TRUEX, with Keselowski, former champions. You got Kurt Busch up there as well, another former champion. I got to make a change to my earlier predictions, and this might shock you guys, but I think Brad Keselowski is going to win this race at Kansas, and therefore, I think Clint Bowyer will be eliminated in this round. You look at the drivers Clint Bowyer is directly competing with, Kurt Busch and Martin Truex Jr. He has not been as good as either of them in these playoffs. As far as like the actual car performances, some of his finishes have been better because, Truex has been involved in wrecks a little bit here and there, but overall Bowyer has not run as well as Truex or as Kurt Busch. So I think he's going to fall to 8th on the grid during the race itself, which means if Brad Keselowski is able to win, that would knock Bowyer out, and that's exactly what I think is going to happen. I think Clint Bowyer will run around 10th to 12th place. I think that's about where he'll finish. I think Martin Truex Jr. will run top 5, which will vault him ahead of Bowyer in the standings, put Bowyer on the chopping block, and then once Brad Keselowski wins, because I think he will, Clint Bowyer will be eliminated as a result. Those are my predictions. I know I originally had Clint Bowyer making it all the way to Homestead when I made my predictions before the playoffs even started. I'm going against that now because that team has not run well, and the way things are shaping up, I have a bad feeling for Bowyer that this could be Brad Keselowski's week to break through and get another win and continue what could be a kind of shocking championship run. I say shocking because remember back in August, we didn't really see this coming at all. But since then, he's won a bunch of races and, it seems very, very good. And, he got involved in a wreck late at Dover, had issues early on, a loose wheel at Talladega. Those are the only reason his first 2 finishes in this round are not very good. If not for those kind of, unavoidable errors or mistakes that weren't Keselowski's fault, he'd probably be just fine right now. That team's run pretty well. They have not slowed down much since their hot streak at the end of September and early October. I think they'll be fine. I think Brad Keselowski wins the race. Those are my predictions. Let me know what you guys think, though. Do you think I'm crazy? Maybe I am, but time will tell. Anyway, y'all, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on Instagram, or you can become a Patreon supporter like Cameron James, Michael Harrison, and the rest of these amazing, amazing supporters. If you too want to support me and the show directly, you can check out that top link down in the description below. Thank you guys, as always, for the support. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for leaving comments and, all that fun stuff. I'll be back probably after the race at Kansas. I know only one midweek episode this week. I've been so busy with schoolwork. My goodness, I'm pumping out stuff all over the place, projects galore. It's been a lot, but I was able to fit this episode in, so I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back after Kansas, hopefully the next few weeks. The rest of these playoffs will be a little more light, so I can get back to talking about all the big NASCAR news stories. Luckily, this week's been a relatively slow news week, so it's allowed me to catch up on some other things. Anyway, y'all, thanks for watching. Be back at it this weekend. Hope you guys have a good one. See y'all.